Celtic go into Champions League playoff round action this week, hoping to progress to the Champions League proper. Over the years, these qualifiers have been a mixed bag for Celtic. In this video, let's take a look at all of Celtic's final Champions League qualifying games over the years. First up, in 2001, Celtic travelled to Amsterdam to take on Ajax. Martin O'Neill's side delivered an unforgettable performance in the first leg to claim a 3-1 victory, courtesy of goals from Bobby Petta, Didier Agathe and Chris Sutton. Before this, it had been almost 2 decades since Celtic really made a mark on European football, and scoring this major upset was a sign of better things to come under O'Neill. The Irishman was keen to emphasise that the tie was still alive after the first leg and stated, "I don't want to sound patronising, but they are capable of scoring goals. Nobody in that dressing room thinks we have won this tie, but I'm obviously delighted. This was a great performance, but it will be a very difficult game in 2 weeks' time."
But Sutton wasn't having it. Lambert and Lennon combine, they do it so well. Sutton, good touch. That's useful. And Krum panicked. Petta! Celtic are ahead! The Dutchman puts them in front in Amsterdam. A bad mistake by goalkeeper Grimm, living up to his surname. 1-0 Celtic.
2 weeks later in Glasgow, Ajax did indeed record a 1-0 win, but it wasn't enough to prevent Celtic from qualifying for the Champions League group stage for the first time ever. The following season, Celtic went into qualifiers full of confidence with a winning team filled with quality players such as Chris Sutton, Stilian Petrov and, of course, Henrik Larsson. However, disaster struck against Swiss champions FC Basel. In the first leg at Celtic Park, Martin O'Neill's men went 1-0 down in the second minute of the game, but rallied to come back and win 3-1 on the night, with the 88th minute goal from Momo Silla seemingly creating some much needed breathing space ahead of the second leg.
There's a little turn there. Just kept in play. Guppy, another excellent ball. Silla! Brilliant goal by Silla! Oh, that could be worth an enormous amount to the club. Swept it right in with that right foot of his. He's missed so many, and now that changes the entire complexion of this tie. He missed the penalty, but look at the way he struck this so cleanly.
In Switzerland, Basel recorded a 2-0 win on the night to progress, thanks to the away goals rule that was in place at the time, with brothers Murat Yakin and Hakim Yakin running the show. It was a sore one to take at the time, and yet it set up Celtic to go on their most memorable run of the 21st century that season, as the side dropped down to the UEFA Cup and made it all the way to the final before losing 3-2 in extra time to Jose Mourinho's Porto. Things went much smoother in the 2003-2004 campaign. After easily dismissing Lithuanian side Kaunas, Martin O'Neill's team were drawn against Hungarian champions MTK Budapest. As expected, Celtic were far too strong for the Hungarians and progressed after a convincing 5-0 aggregate win, with a 4-0 away thumping followed up by a 1-0 victory in Glasgow to seal a place in the group stage for the second time in club history.
An altogether less stressful affair. Chris Sutton, the only scorer at Parkhead, as they eased to a 5-0 aggregate win over MTK Hungaria.
As automatic entry was gained by winning the SPL in 2004, the next qualifier came in 2005, and it was a complete and utter disaster. Gordon Strachan had replaced Martin O'Neill as Celtic manager now, and in his first competitive game as manager, Celtic infamously lost 5-0 away to Slovakian side Art Media Bratislava. It was the worst result Strachan would endure during a 4-year spell as manager, and it happened in his very first game. In the return leg at Celtic Park, Strachan's men came painfully close to overturning the deficit, winning 4-0 on the night, but it just wasn't to be. The loss sent Celtic tumbling out of European competition for the season in July.
And a fourth goal came their way. Beattie gave Celtic real hope, but that fifth and essential goal just wouldn't come.
Fair to point out and remember that Armenia Bratislava ended up being a decent side that season, being drawn in a group that included Rangers, Inter Milan and Porto. Alex McLeish's Rangers side couldn't do what Celtic managed to do in Glasgow, as they drew both home and away with the Slovakians, who also recorded an away win against Porto and a home draw against Porto, who were the then reigning champions of Europe also. It would be 2007 before Celtic would go through qualifiers again, this time facing a tough tie against Russian side Spartak Moscow. Both legs ended 1 each, before Celtic memorably triumphed in a penalty shootout at Parkhead, with Tommy Burns jumping on top of the massive joyful humanity for unforgettable scenes as Celtic progressed to the group stage. By 2009, Gordon Strachan was gone as manager, and in stepped Tony Mowbray. At this stage, Celtic Park was still viewed as a real fortress of European football, with Martin O'Neill and Gordon Strachan having recorded so many memorable wins over giant teams in the decade prior. However, that reputation really began to slide downwards by the time Mowbray took charge. His first competitive game as Celtic manager ended in a 1-0 home defeat to Dynamo Moscow, but to his credit, Celtic pulled off an incredible comeback and won 2-0 in the second leg in Russia.
Kokorin was there, just lashed forward. Samaras is there. Georgios Samaras wants the touch, he's going across, can he finish? Yes he can! Georgios Samaras! His first European goal for Celtic. It's a historic goal for Celtic. Dynamo Moscow 0, Celtic 2.
Celtic were drawn against Arsenal in the playoff round, and Arsene Wenger's side were simply too strong for Celtic. They won 2-0 at Celtic Park and 3-1 in London for a 5-1 aggregate victory that sent Celtic down to the Europa League. Another managerial change meant Neil Lennon took charge when Celtic were drawn against Portuguese side Braga in Champions League qualifying the following year in 2010. Braga brushed Celtic aside for a comfortable 3-0 win in the first leg, and a 2-1 win for Celtic in the return game wasn't enough to stop them crashing out of Europe's premier competition for another season. Next up came 2012 and a happier ending for Neil Lennon's men. After easily defeating HJK Helsinki 4-1 on aggregate, Celtic were given a kind draw against unlikely Swedish champions Helsingborg. Celtic would record 2-0 victories both home and away in that playoff round to progress to the group stage with ease. The following season saw Lennon's men breeze through Cliftonville and eliminate Swedish side Elfsborg, and they slaughtered a sheep on the pitch before kick-off in a bizarre pre-match tradition, but it was Celtic players who were lambs led to the slaughter on the night as Karagandhi recorded a 2-0 win. However, Neil Lennon's men turned things around back in Glasgow. Chris Commons and Georgios Samaras scored to bring things level, before James Forrest netted in injury time to record a 3-0 victory for Celtic and helped the side progress once more to the Champions League group stage.
One Stokesy!
Going into qualifying in 2014 saw yet another managerial change. Neil Lennon was now out, and in his place came Norwegian coach Ronny Deila. Celtic saw off Icelandic champions KR Reykjavik with ease, before coming up against Polish champions Legia Warsaw. In the first leg in Poland, they hammered Celtic 4-1, with only an away goal from Callum McGregor, which was actually the opening goal of the game, keeping any faint hope of progression for Celtic alive.
Broś, Kosecki! 11, ale i tak zagrali legioniści bardzo skutecznie. Kuba Kosecki!
Ale tu możemy też troszeczkę pochwalić Iwicę.
And that game was followed up by a 3-0 victory in Scotland to see Celtic progress. Sort of. The return game was held at Murrayfield, as Celtic Park was being used for the 2014 Commonwealth Games. On the night, Legia actually won the game 2-0 in what was an utterly miserable showing from Celtic. However, in the 88th minute of the game, with the aggregate scoreline being Legia 6, Celtic 1, the Polish side substituted an ineligible player onto the field. UEFA had made it very clear before the competition started that any side which played an ineligible player would be forfeiting that game and be eliminated from the tournament. As such, the scoreline was overturned to a 3-0 victory for Celtic, which sent Deila's side through on away goals. On purely sporting merit, it was obviously a ludicrous decision. Legia were the better side over both legs, and to be kicked out over a last-minute sub with the tie already wrapped up was just a painful pill to swallow for them. But rules were rules, and Celtic were allowed to progress to the playoff round to take on Slovenian champions Maribor. A golden opportunity, totally undeserved, and wouldn't you just know, Celtic would absolutely blow it. A 1-1 draw in the first leg in Slovenia set things up nicely for the return game, but an abysmal performance saw Maribor claim a 1-0 win in Glasgow to go through to the group stage. Things didn't go too much better the following season. Ronnie Deila's side came into qualifiers full of confidence, and after a ropey start with that Maribor and Legia Warsaw fiasco, Deila had managed to win over many of the Celtic fans with a solid second half of the previous season. They eliminated Icelandic and Azerbaijani opposition before being drawn against Swedish champions Malmo in the playoff round. In the first leg at Celtic Park, Celtic were 3-1 up deep into stoppage time when Joe Inge Berget, a Norwegian winger who had been on loan at Celtic Park the year before and had his loan cut short early due to poor performances, netted with one of the final touches of the game to score his second goal of the night and make things very nervy for the Scottish champions heading over to Sweden for the second leg.
What will you bring to Celtic?
I'll bring goals, I hope. Assisting goals, scoring goals, and some entertainment for the crowd.
It was as if that late second away goal played on the players' minds, and they never recovered. Malmo recorded a 2-0 win to qualify for the group stage, and a very long season began for Celtic fans. In the summer of 2016, Ronnie Deila was gone, and in came Brendan Rodgers for his first spell as Celtic manager. Despite an infamous 1-0 defeat away to Gibraltar side Lincoln Red Imps in his first competitive game as manager,
It's a bit of a difficult chance here for Lincoln. Is it in?
Oh my God!
Back of the net.
Oh my God!
And Lincoln have taken the lead here against Celtic.
Celtic quickly rebounded to win 3-0 in the return game before eliminating more Kazakhstani opposition in the form of Astana, and were drawn in the playoff round against Israeli side Hapoel Beersheva. An incredible first leg, which included a beautiful pre-match display from the Celtic fans, saw Celtic go 3-0 up in the first half before a 2-minute lapse in concentration allowed Beersheva to bring the score back to 3-2. Thankfully, Moussa Dembele scored a fourth before Scott Brown added a crucial fifth goal late in the game to give Celtic a comfortable lead heading into the second leg. Well, that game ended up being anything but comfortable, as the Israeli team won 2-0 on the night, and Craig Gordon even saved a penalty to prevent total calamity. A woeful performance against a team from an occupying nation, but enough to book Celtic a spot in the Champions League group stage, and the fine from UEFA for the Palestine flag display was more than worth paying. Things weren't quite so dramatic in 2017. Celtic easily dispatched of Linfield and eliminated Rosenborg before being drawn in the playoff round with that same Kazakhstani side they played the previous year in qualifying, Astana. A 5-0 home hammering was followed up by an eventful 4-3 away loss to allow Celtic to qualify with a crazy aggregate score of 8-4. Those results meant Brendan Rodgers had successfully guided Celtic through qualifiers for 2 consecutive years, but it wasn't to be a hat-trick in 2018. After eliminating Armenian side Alashkert and once again putting out Rosenborg, Celtic were this time drawn against Greek champions AEK Athens in the playoff round. A 1-1 draw in the first leg set up a nervy decider in Greece. Fans, and perhaps even Brendan Rodgers himself, were furious at the board's inability to sufficiently back the team, as was so often the story going into these qualifiers during these years. All too often, players like Nir Beaton were forced to fill in at centre-back as the likes of Peter Lawwell tried to squeeze through these qualifying ties with a threadbare squad. Well, we got caught out here as Athens won 2-1 in the away leg to proceed to the group stage. Belgian centre-half Dedrick Boyata claimed to be injured and didn't play the game, only for Celtic to claim Boyata actually refused to play as he had tried to force through a transfer that never came. By the following summer, Rodgers was gone and Neil Lennon had returned as Celtic manager. Victories over Bosnian and Estonian opposition set up a playoff tie with Cluj of Romania. The same old story unfolded. A 1-1 draw in the first leg set up a golden chance to qualify that Celtic would squander. At Parkhead, Cluj recorded a 4-3 victory over a Celtic squad that was crying out for reinforcements in the transfer window that the board simply refused to sanction.
Dă în adversar și cred că va mai fi lăsat acest atac al lui Celtic, dar Eduard este deposedat de burcă. Djokovic n-a fost offside. Țucudă! Gol! Celtic este răpusă chiar la ea acasă. CFR câștigă cu 4.
Neil Lennon opted to deploy Callum McGregor at left back in a move that backfired badly. But Celtic were short of quality in that position in the first place after selling Kieran Tierney to Arsenal for £25 million and failing to sufficiently replace him. It was a self-inflicted wound from the club. The following season saw the unique scenario of a one-legged playoff being played behind closed doors during the COVID pandemic. Once more, it was a nightmare for Celtic as they were defeated 2-1 by Hungarian side Ferencváros. After the game, Neil Lennon would state, "I have no idea on that one," in what was the first radiating red flag of the utter shambles of a season that was about to unfold. In 2021, Ange Postecoglou was brought in as manager, and the entire Celtic squad needed rebuilt. Yet, by the time of the start of qualifiers in July, the board had failed to bring in almost any reinforcements, forcing the Australian manager to play a backline of Anthony Ralston, who had barely appeared for the club over the previous 2 years and had just been on loan at 2nd Division Dundee United, Stephen Welsh, Nir Beaton and Greg Taylor. They somehow managed to record a 1-1 draw against Danish side Midtjylland in the first leg before losing 2-1 in Denmark in the return to be eliminated, by which point the board had once more failed to strengthen.
אצלו איזה טאץ', איזו מסירה נהדרת כמובן לשחקן כנף. שים לב לטאץ' הזה, דיברנו עליו בתחילת המשחק. הבחור מוסר פשוט כדורים נהדרים שהוא רוצה. הרוחב מתוזמן וטוב, ועוד ידיקה.
Forcing Big Ange to give a debut to 18-year-old Dane Murray at centre-half, as Beaton was suspended following a red card picked up in the first leg as he was yet again played out of position. It was as if the Celtic board had given up and written off these qualifiers before they even began that year. Well, since then we've had 3 consecutive years of automatic qualification to the Champions League proper, but as the Scottish coefficient is now so low due to Scottish sides' poor showings in Europe over the past half-decade, it's back to qualifiers from here on out for Celtic. Let's hope we've learnt our lessons and go in better prepared from now on, because despite being played in the summer, these are always some of the most important games of Celtic's season every single year.